Hello, my name is Karan Taneja. In this video, I'm talking about her paper Human-AI Interaction Design in Machine Teaching. My co-authors are Harshvardhan Sikka and Professor Ashok Goel at the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. Before we dive into interaction design for machine teaching systems, I wish to define the scope of machine teaching and discuss an example to motivate our work. We define machine teaching as the process of a human teacher teaching a machine learner with the goal of producing a machine learning model. This human AI interaction that is happening here is designed with two main goals. First is maximizing teachers' efficiency, and second is maximizing learners' performance. Consider this example where we wish to develop a classifier for Jill Watson, that is a virtual teaching assistant in online classes. Jill Watson relies on an intent classifier to predict the user intent. In this example, a student has asked Jill Watson about the submission process of an assignment. Intent classifier correctly identifies the intent submission and passes it over to an entity extraction module, which passes its result to a retrieval module to produce the final answer. Jill Watson says, upload the zip file on Canvas and so on. We wish to enable a human teacher to interact with a machine and teach it to perform well on the intent classification task. What will this conversation look like? The machine will show the example, how do I turn in an assignment, and show the current prediction with confidence scores, as shown in parentheses here. These predictions can be based on an initial model trained with a few examples. The teacher says the current intent is submission. The machine says, okay, which words are not important or inconsequential for the intent submission? And the human says, do, I, and assignment don't seem very important. Notice that teacher can see the word importance values given by the machine and focus on correcting the machine where it may be wrong. And now the machine asks which words are important for the intent. Human identifies turn in as important words for the intent submission, since turning in means submitting the assignment. And now the machine is asking about the words that can replace turn in the original input without changing the intent. Teacher says turn over and give are valid replacement. And conversation goes on to get replacement for other important words and then on to other examples. This particular system that we implemented used information collected from human teacher to perform a data augmentation process to generate the training data. But the question arises, how do we more generally design such machine teaching systems? And by the end of this talk, I promise that you will have a framework to think about machine teaching systems and how to design them. In a previous work, which I'll mention here briefly, we developed a framework for machine teaching systems and introduced the system that I illustrated earlier. Our framework has three parts to it. First is the teaching interface, where the human AI interaction happens, and the information that is gathered here is used to improve the other two components, the machine learner and the knowledge base. Knowledge base is an umbrella term used to describe the existing resources that we can leverage and the memory that we have stored. The machine learner describes the feedback interpretation mechanism, which we'll discuss in more detail later, and the ML algorithms that it will use to train or fine-tune machine learning models. The whole design process begins with the task that we want to solve. The first question that we need to ask is, what feedback interpretation mechanism am I using here? That is, how am I going to leverage the human feedback in training the machine learning model? In the example I discussed earlier, I mentioned that we use data augmentation as a feedback interpretation process. More generally, feedback can be used to modify parts of training and inference process. I mentioned some examples here. One can use feedback to perform data augmentation, make input features, penalize intermediate representation such as attention map, or use it to modify loss function. One can also use it to construct inference rules, for example, for large language models, or store information for retrieval during inference. Ultimately, the mechanism that you use will depend on the task at hand and what techniques are currently used to solve similar problems. Once we know the feedback interpretation mechanism, we need to specify existing tools and other resources that we'll need to create the machine teaching system. All these go under knowledge base. In the rest of the presentation, we'll focus on teaching interface and its components. First component is teaching feedback, which is the human to AI part of communication channel. Human teacher, as we saw in the example earlier, has to perform different teaching tasks to communicate their expertise. These tasks can be based on different interaction types, exemplifying some feature, classifying an image or a text, scoring some model outputs, etc. Overall, the teaching tasks are used to perform two main activities: planning the teaching curriculum, that is, selecting the most useful examples, and explaining knowledge related to the domain. As a principle, when the teaching tasks are well designed, a teacher should be able to understand the teaching tasks without ML expertise and unambiguously determine the feedback response for the machine. The next component of the teaching interface is the machine state, which is the AI to human channel of communication. By perceiving this machine state, the teacher is able to understand the current limitations of the machine and correct mistakes by performing the teaching tasks that we discussed. So, this step of the design process is to essentially decide the content and the presentation of the machine state for each teaching task and aim to elicit the right mental model about machine in teacher's mind. Once we have all these details about how the machine teaching system will work, we focus on UX and UI design to maximize teachers' productivity. We share some suggestions and a lot more details about all the previous steps in the paper. So please check it out if you're interested. And the last but not the least, the final step of the process is to create a teacher onboarding process, which is used to give our teachers the knowledge they will need to interact with the machine teaching system and sort of bring them at par with machine teaching system experts in terms of teaching quality and efficiency. Some previous works have observed that just by showing 3 to 5 minute training videos, their participants with machine learning expertise did not show any advantage over other participants. If you end up reading our workshop paper in more detail, you'll find the web interface that we developed for our machine teaching system and all the big and small decisions that went into making it. We have also discussed previous research related to each step of the design process that we discussed. And we finally end the paper with 5 future research directions from human computer interaction and cognitive science perspective. Thank you for listening, and please reach out to us over email or Twitter with your questions and thoughts. I'm Karan Taneja, a computer science PhD student and research assistant at Georgia Tech. Harshvardhan Sikka is a research scientist and faculty at Georgia Tech and is associated with the NSF AILO Institute. AILO stands for National AI Institute for Adult Learning and Online Education. And Professor Ashok Goel at Georgia Tech is the executive director of NSF AILO Institute.